Hello everyone and welcome back to Ancient Nagash channel dedicated to Sigmar, and in this video we are going to be talking about why play Skaven. So yes, the fluffy little rats that we all love and hate. So the idea of this video is if you're thinking about starting a Skaven army, or you already started, want a little bit of motivation, in this video we'll be going over the strengths and weaknesses of the army, and sort of hopefully by the end of the video you'll have a bit more of an understanding if it's an army for you. So with no further ado, let's get into it, and we're going to start with the lore. So Skaven really, I would say, are potentially the most fluffy race in Warhammer. So when I say that, the most sort of lore filled, and it's probably more targeted at like Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar when I say this, just because for me personally I love their lore, and obviously I'm a massive fan of Nagash's lore and all that sort of thing, hence the channel's name. But for me, the Skaven are just what makes me want to play them. All in all, is just how fantastic they are in the story. But for people who are brand new, you might be wondering, what are the Skaven? So they are a chaos race, and they are essentially just rat men. But they have so much character to every single one of them. It ranges from their simple backstabbing of each other, how the Skaven threat is literally one of the biggest things in the world that was, or the mortal realms. And the main reason why this biggest threat, or one of the biggest threats, doesn't try and conquer everything is because it's just insistent on backstabbing and killing each other, mainly because they think we could rise up and attack. However, before we do that, I've got to kill the person who lives in the burrow next to me, or the house next to me, whatever they live in, because if I don't do that, he's going to kill me and take my shit. So I need to kill him and take his shit so he doesn't do that to mine. So that is very much like, just one Skaven may be thinking that, but because that one Skaven's thinking of it, that's basically what they're all thinking, and that's why they never really get much done on a grand scale. However, we talk about where they were in the world that was. We have amazing inventions from the Skavens. They made a rocket to hit the moon, from what I believe. They also had things like a telephone, but it was called like a talkie squeaker or something like that. They have things like flamethrowers. They have Gatling guns, so like mini guns, but they call them rattling guns instead of Gatling guns. That and all is brilliant, I think. It's absolutely great. They also have things like sniper rifles. They have doom wheels, was essentially just massive hamster wheels that are charged into battle, and they actually have loads of rats that actually propel the wheel forward in a sort of like hamster wheel sort of run. Absolutely fantastic. There's absolutely loads to them. They're also a big thing about the Skaven is they are. So we talk about what lore is known for them from Age of Sigmar, and a very broad stroke of how they came about in Age of Sigmar. Basically, in the world that was, when it was destroyed, the Skaven essentially feasted on the corpses of all the dead people, kind of. And then the Great Horn Rat, who is their god, which the Skaven are scared shitless of. It's basically a massive Skaven, nasty, sinister type of god. Looked down at his children and realised that they were eventually going to die on this forsaken world, or a husk of a world. So what he did is he scooped handfuls of their children up and ran through the void of space and everything, and when he came across the mortal realms, he chucked them to the deepest and darkest corners of the realm, so caves, undergrounds, all these sorts of things. Almost reminds you of Gloomspite Gits, those sort of like dark, dank places, and set them there so they could sort of like breed and multiply, and then really become something that infests the mortal realms. And Skaven in Age of Sigmar, not as much as they were in Warhammer Fantasy, but they still do play a part in their lore of a lot of races try and, well, I say try, they just simply don't believe Skaven exist. They think they're ignorant to the fact that this is a massive threat that sometimes, in some occasions, literally just live right under like Sigmarite cities, all these sorts of things, or just like order cities. There will be like a massive burrow there. Things like Blight City, which is a take on Skaven Blight, which from the world that was, that's like their main city in the Mortal Realms. And then basically all the tunnels branch out from there and create all these sort of like under cities and everything, which really creates like an under empire, or the Skaven empire, or Skaven under empire used to be called. I don't know if they use that exact word anymore in Age of Sigmar, because they sort of distance themselves a little bit from fantasy. But essentially, if you know Skaven from Warhammer Fantasy, they're kind of pretty much the same in Age of Sigmar, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, the lore's fantastic, so why change it? They have different clans. So in Skaven, they have, off the top of my head, they have 5 clans. So they have the Master Clan, which is like all the Graces and stuff. And like the big characters, I suppose. You have then Clan Eshin, Clan Mulder, Clan Scryer, Clan Pestilent, and then there is a 6th one, which is Clan Verminous, which is kind of new. When I say they have, well, 6 clans, they have lots of different clans, and clans are basically like Space Marine chapters in the sense of, you know, you can create your own. They don't say there are only 6 clans and that's it, so it's hard for you to try and be creative. You can make your own clans and all these sorts of things, but they are the main ones, and they are the ones where members of those clans have seats on the Council 13, which is in, if it's anything like Skaven Blight, it's in Blight City, and in there they have 13 seats. The 13th seat is saved for the Great Horn Rat, and then the other 12 seats are held by, if they call the same as they were in Warhammer Fantasy, they're called like Lords of Decay, I believe, which are basically the toughest and sometimes the oldest Skaven members to exist, which also makes them probably the most vile and conniving and backstabbing members of the Skaven society as well, who govern how Skaven society runs in a very sort of twisted way. So yeah, there's loads of, this is obviously, I'm just talking off the top of my head when I come to Skaven lore, and this is obviously just a massive broad stroke. There's so much to each individual elements of them. They've got fantastic characters like Thankwell Bone Ripper as an example, absolutely great. And Skaven as an army, I will obviously, with every other army, I do intend to do a full series on them where I take months to basically cover everything I can for them. So this is a very broad stroke. So I just want to get that out there because there's so much more to them. But this is basically just the top of my head sort of things that make me excited about the Skaven, is that they are just, you know, I can't remember who said this, but someone said this, and it's a case of like a Skaven would not just stab someone from his own race in the back to get the last cookie, but he would just do it for the sheer enjoyment of stabbing them in the back. It's things like, and this comes over into the rules, which we're going to get into, where in Skaven society, life is very cheap. They are like the most numerous race in Age of Sigmar, give or take. Maybe you could say like the Gloomspite Gits have a lot of numbers and stuff, but Skaven really, they're the first thing that come to my mind as the most numerous race in terms of like how it's their population. So life is cheap. They have lots of slaves, all that sort of thing, and so that also transfers into when they're on the battlefield. If they kill one enemy, and in doing so they fired a big like explosive device and it killed 4 Skaven, that's a win in a lot of cases. It doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter if we lose 4 of our guys to one of their guys. Usually that is a good outcome in battle. And then you can see like there are rules and stuff that you can try and enhance your like weapon teams and stuff to do extra damage, but there's a chance they could blow up. You can make Doom Wheels ride over your own guys and kill them, but just to get to the enemy to kill them as well. There's lots of things you can have fun with. Okay, so I think it's about time to move on, otherwise I can just ramble on their lore for absolutely ages. So when we're looking at a more collective point of view, a few things I'd like to say about the army is it has got some nice models in its range, filled with quite a few like some focal points, and also just some larger models as well, which is great. A few models the Skaven have, which are some of my favourite models in Warhammer by Games Workshop, are things like the Doom Wheel. I think it's an absolutely fantastic model. I actually have 2 Doom Wheels, and I actually have, basically for me with Skaven, I haven't really played them. I've had like a couple of games a while back when the book came out, but I bought a massive collection of Skaven realised the project was just going to be too big for me. We're talking like 15,000 points of Skaven to build and paint, all that sort of thing. It's just going to be too big, so I ended up selling pretty much all of it. But the things I kept were the models I really liked, so things like Hell Pits, Doom Wheels, Vermlord, Weapon Teams, those sort of things I really liked. So I've got some on my collection. So I really like the Doom Wheels, great models. The Hell Pit, fantastic model. And things like that are like not the newest model, but I really feel like it does still live up to some, of the new age Sigmar sculpts. Absolutely great. The Vermlord I love as well. That's basically their greater demon for Skaven. Like Blaze of Corn have the Bloodthirster. Hedonite Slanesh have the Keeper of Secrets. The Cypress of Zeech have the Lord of Change, and then the Man King of Nurgle have the Great Unclean One. The Skaven have the Vermlord, because essentially the Great Horn Rat, the god I mentioned earlier, he has now been elevated to like the same Chaos Pantheon as Khorne, Zeech, Nurgle, and Slanesh. Even that Slanesh is lost at the moment. Then the Great Horn Rat is basically, I'd say, the weakest one out of the lot. And then there's things where people say, like, could he actually be Nurgle? Could he actually be Zeech? There's a lot to it, but that's a discussion for another time. But no, so there are lots of models. There's some models in the range that are some of my favourite models of all time. I also really like, even like the smaller models. So Quick Head Taker, as an example, is I think just like a Claw Lord now. I think they're called, like the Skaven Warlords, essentially. I absolutely love that model. I love his trophy rack. Anything else come with it, and I've got a metal one of that, so I really am a massive fan of that one. And so some nice models in the range. Right, and then going on to talk about another thing, what I think is good about collecting them is they've essentially got lots of different ways to play, and this can come from just painting your army and theming it really how you would like to. So you can do like a mixed Skaven force, which has obviously got things like all from Clan Pestilence, Clan Scryer, Clan Eshin, Moulder, Master Clan, Clan Verminous, and Pestilence. You can really mix and match it how you like to make the list how you want, or how to make your collection how you want. Don't feel like I'm focusing on Moulder as an example, but I'd love to get some, I don't know, Plague Core catapults, but I don't really feel like that's a good thing. Or some Warp Lightning Cannons, I don't think that would fit in well. You can do it, you can make it work, which is cool. And like I say, you can go with the clans, or you can go with Horde, with lots of Clan Rats, or lots of Plague Monks, which is popular. Or you can go Elite with things like Storm Fiends, Rat Ogres. I suppose you could do it with Storm Vermin to a point, or more elite than Clan Rats, but you can really build a mix and match it how you would like to, and theme it. And that also goes into the other part of the army, is that it's one of those armies where it can be very competitive. So it can win tournaments, it can be right at the top there, but it's not one of those armies where that's the only gear it has. It can also play incredibly narrative, to the point where like you're trying to not win your games, just how crazy narratively you're going, like in some points with the Skaven, especially with the risks you take while you're playing them. But you can really make them quite narrative driven, and you can find an in-between as well. So if you're just doing like one army, or you want to start an army that you want to be able to take to tournaments at some point in the future. However, I don't know, in your local store, it's not really a competitive scene. So you want an army you can take to those tournaments in the future, and you also want the army to be able to play nicely against people who aren't the most competitive, or just simply don't like playing that way. You can fit your army for what situation is required, if you like, if that works. So you can make your narrative lists out of the same models that you've got. You can just take more variety, or that sort of thing. Or you can go for a certain clan. There's lots of things you can do, which not every army can do that. In the sense of, you could take any army, you could probably make it bad, but just taking like units are just going to not be good. But in the Skaven army, when you try to make the army not super competitive, it's still very fun to play. They still got lots of fluffy rules. When I say fluffy, fluff is in the lore. That's very nice, saturated, colourful, fun rules, and yeah, have loads of fun with it. I mean, like when I fought Skaven, I've mainly fought Skaven in tournaments, and when I came across them in tournaments, most of the time, I'll be honest, like, I've lost against them because they've been quite competitive, and I haven't really know how to deal with them. And but when I have played them on more local store, it's more narrative, not as competitive. They've been super fun to play against. Just like super, when the enemy just supercharges like weapon teams and they blow up. And there was one point where we had a freeway game of Age of Sigmar, and I was taking Wanderers. This was years ago, and I had a friend who was taking Khorne Bloodbound and a friend who was taking the Skaven. And the Skaven, he basically tried to do a arcane bolt at a skull crusher to finish off that unit. There's only one left on like one wound. Didn't get the damage through to the skull crusher, but he basically managed to trigger a reaction where he wiped out probably about a fifth of his army or something. It was a load of fun, and it's a really unique army, and that's what I love. But anyway, so I'm rambling again. So sort of talking about how they play on the table and good things about them. So they've got lots of numbers. So when it comes to wanting to have lots of models on objectives, that sort of thing, screens, all that sort of stuff, numbers are your friend. You can do it. Like I say, you can go elite, but they do excel in numbers as well. They are very good at movement. They have got teleport and shenanigans. Their base stats aren't too slow either. A lot of like movement 6 and so on. They've also got things like retreat and charge for some of the units, like clan rats I believe can do that, which is very useful. Allows you to fix situations that haven't gone so well. You see what I mean? They've got like high mortal wound output as well from warp lightning cannons and everything else, warp fire throws, that sort of thing. And with that, they've got high damage output from shooting and combat. So shooting, like I say, warp lightning cannons, storm fiends. Combat, a massive one people are going to go for plague monks. The only times I fought plague monks are in tournaments, and they are a kind of a pain to deal with. Like, you see the enemy set up 2 blocks of them, and one of them's going to have killing frenzy. So when that means every time a plague monk dies, I believe it basically gets to fight you before it dies. They are problems that you have to deal with, and they're quite cheap in points. So it's like you're worrying too much about the plague monks, but you have to deal with them. So it's just another thing to deal with. How the Skaven play quite well is, like I say, lots of shenanigans they can do, especially like with their scenery piece, like I say, teleporting things, but there's also other things they can do with that. Great scenery piece, and like warp walls. And the best thing about them, it comes from the lore again, where Skaven, they don't really use realm gates. So basically just like their corruption basically just makes a hole through time and space where they can teleport from, which is really cool. But yeah, so with the Skaven, a big tactics you want to do to them is essentially set up screens. So you have like clan rats use your screens, and then you have hard hitting things behind that. So when the enemy charges you, wipe out your screen, then you're going to hit them back, because the Skaven damage output is great. But where we start going into their weaknesses is when we come to things like their resilience is not so fantastic. Their saves are not great at all, really, apart from a couple of exceptions. So that means you can't really take much of a hit. So you need those screens, and you don't really have ways to regenerate models, apart from like 1 or maybe 2 examples. Are not fantastic. So you really need to protect your high damage stuff, because they are glass cannons. So you need your screens. You don't, if you're expecting to be charged by the enemy turn 1, as an example, as a Skaven player, and you've got your plague monks there, and the opponent's going first and he's going to charge you, and you haven't had a hero phase yet, and you put your plague monks there and they haven't been screened, and the enemy can charge from turn 1, it's like you've made a big mistake. So yeah, their saves aren't so good in that sort of thing. So that's something you have to be wary of, when you come to play them. Another sort of weakness I would say for the Skaven is movement, and I've just literally said movement is a strength for them. But what I'm talking about is when it comes to essentially playing the game, as you've got to move so many models across, and if you use movement trays, you are really restricting yourself and handicapping yourself. for when you fight. I mean, movement trays, I don't really use them. I have got some, so I'm going to try and start using them for things like my death armies, because it is. I do try and play competitively, but I'm the sort of person where if something is just simply easier and makes me enjoy the game more, hence movement trays, I will do that, because I don't want to move 100 skeletons across the board, and it gets to the point where I just don't play 100 skeletons because I don't want to do it. So movement trays is, you know, an answer to that, and you can still do that as Skaven. Like I say, you don't have to have so many numbers in your Skaven army. You don't have to run them as hordes, but if you want to, you can. You know, there's the option. There, so that's just something to bear in mind, and it just comes into when you're playing in tournaments and stuff. Just your turns may be longer, especially with like long magic phases and stuff, long hero phases. Your turns may be longer than your opponent, so it's like you both have an equal amount of time before the game runs out of time. You know, to try and be fair to your opponent. But you know, a lot of this is indecisiveness. So, a way of getting around that is, you know, like I say, movement trays, or just practice your army, just like, you know, learn things, so you're not thinking like, oh, what should I do now, or what could be done. They're just trying to think when your opponent is having their turn, essentially just think about your game plan then, so when it comes to your turn you only need a minute to go, right, okay, this is what I need to do, rather than going, right, okay, everything there's happened. Basically process what your opponent is doing in their turn, rather than after they've completed their turn and that's your turn, then you're processing what's just happened in the last like 15 minutes. Do it as it happens, and it's just like little things that help, and then, you know, it makes you and your opponent have a better game, I would say. Another sort of like strength and weakness with the army is, like I say, you can lots of things in the army can, especially like clan scryer stuff and weapon teams, basically you can enhance the damage on them, or basically enhance the weapon in some way to make it a longer range or something like that, or you roll more attacks, which are really good ways to deal damage to the enemy, but there's a chance that your weapon team could blow up and die. Not many other things in the Warhammer Age Sigmar have that sort of risk-reward strategy, but it means that, again, if you want to play narrative and all that, it's absolutely hilarious and it's brilliant. But if you're playing competitive and you're like, I don't care, this weapon team size, they really need to get the damage out, you've got that to your card as well. And what I would say is, if I was playing Skaven and you were absolutely trumping your opponent and you know you're going to win, and especially if it's a friendly game, you can just start overcharging everything, so you know something's going to blow up and it's going to make your opponent laugh. They're like little things. What I would say overall is the biggest weakness for Skaven, because like I said, they are a competitive army, they can win tournaments, everything like that, they are one of the top armies out there. However, like I say, one of their biggest weaknesses, I'd say, is their model range. I've just said they have some nice models and all that sort of thing, which they do, but a lot of their model range is old models that do look dated. You know, they don't look, you know, like fucking horrendous compared to some other stuff, but there are some out there which they do just look old. Like I wish they made new gutter runners, and like I say, Clanesh and stuff is, some of it is quite old. And would be nice if they redid them, like rat ogres, like the ones that you don't get from Old Blood, are very, very dated. And then there's lots of resin and metal. We think some things like Clanesh, for example, by the Blood Bowl team, and you can Skaven Blight Scramblers, are they called? Something like that. You can really make it work without putting in too much effort. So there are ways around it, but like, and when I say like rat ogres, for example, without the R Blood ones, the R Blood ones only come in like two molds, like two forms, so looks a bit repetitive after a while. And you could try and convert the one on the Screaming Bell to work, but like there should be a new rat ogre kit. But so that's one of the things that would put me off from massively going into them right now, is because they haven't had that model update. So, you know, maybe wait out for them to get the model update. But all I'm going to say with that is, that's one of the reasons I didn't go into Seraphon, is because I'm not going to start Seraphon because I absolutely love Lizardmen. The reason I'm not going to start them is because I might as well wait until they get their update, which is going to come, because Seraphon have been waiting ages for an update, and then they got an update, and then their models just didn't get updated, and it really annoyed me, and I didn't even play the army. So all I'm going to say is don't have your hopes too high with Skaven that they're going to get new models. But to be fair, the majority of their models are service worthy in the sense of you've got things like clan rats, which don't look too bad. You know, they're fine. They do their job. They do the job fine. Plague monks look alright. You've got, storm vermin, which are nice models. They look fine. It's mainly like the more clan specific ones. Plague sensor bearers is another one that they do look pretty goddamn old. Clan Squire, like acolytes, the ones who throw like the gas bombs. The models, they're not awful. They are metal and they do charge a ridiculous amount of money for them. It's like £7 something for one. Absolutely ridiculous, especially when you can take like 20 in a unit or whatever it is. It is absolutely stupid. But before the end of time, the models will have an update. So there is that. That's to them, I suppose. But that, I just wanted to get out there because that's for me is one of the biggest weaknesses. Like I have actually got their battle tome, and I've got got a limited edition Skaven battle tome, which is the 8th battle tome out of 800 that were printed. So it's quite nice because when you look at the page, it says 008/800. So it's a nice image mirrored. That's the best limited edition battle tome number I've got, which is cool. So I will return to Skaven at some point, but you just have to sort of think things out. But they do have lots of nice models to make up for it. Like I say, plenty of hero choices. Lots of fun you can do with them. And they are really super army for reflecting their lore in the game, I would say. And they're one of the funnest armies. Like even when I say, like, when I go to tournaments and I'm going to fight against them, like they're going to bring another fucking vortex at me, which is a powerful spell. The warp lightning vortex thing, that's good for them as well. But when I do fight against Skaven, I am like, it's going to be a fun game. No matter how it goes, most Skaven players are good as well. That's something I've noticed. And it's just going to be a battle loss, which is great for an army that can play competitively and narratively. Right, guys, so I think I've talked long enough and sort of rambled long enough about Skaven, because like I say, I don't actively play them, so it's not an army I massively know as much, but I feel like I've outlined what I'd say the strength and weakness of the army. I hope you've managed to get a bit more of an understanding if it's an army for you. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below. That does massively help, and a massive shout out to the Patrons who do a massive job for the channel. Really do help produce everything I can. And yes, guys, so if you've got any more questions about Skaven, if I can answer them, I will. Like I say, I think it's a really fun army to do and has some of the best lore in Age of Sigmar. I'd say, like, if you're let's say firstly, if you're not a fan of their lore, you're probably it's not going to be an army for you. But if you're a fan of their lore, you will love them because that really is reflected in the rules better than most other armies are. Okay, guys, so I thank you very much for watching this. Remember, stay safe, wash your hands, stay inside, protect the NHS and everything else in your National Health Service wherever you come from. Hope everyone's okay, and remember, until next time, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.